Welcome back everyone. As most of you guys know, there's a lot of technology being released right now, a lot of great phones and everything, but I didn't want to talk about those. I want to talk about the random phone that came out in 2016, which is the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge, and I want to see how this thing holds up in the later part of 2020. Now, I talked about this phone early this year. I don't think I got a chance to talk it in the middle of this year, and what's very interesting about a phone like this is that there is still so much hardware on this phone that is still so relevant. It still feels like a super premium flagship device, and really, in my opinion, the only thing that's limiting it is probably the software. So this thing came out in 2016, which honestly doesn't even feel that long ago, just about 4 years, well, over 4 years ago. It's about to be 5 years in a couple months. And when you look at this thing, there's two people out there. There's the people who think that this phone actually still looks pretty good, and then there's the people who probably don't think it looks good because, it has a lot of bezel on it. And I'm kind of in the middle. I think this phone looks pretty good. I don't really think there's a lot to hate on this specific phone, but at the same time, I think this phone's bezel is probably the thing that probably ruined it the most in my opinion. But at that time in 2016, pretty much all phones had bezels. You look at the iPhone 7 Plus, you look at all the OnePlus devices that came out that year. Maybe not the OnePlus devices, but a majority of devices that came out in 2016 pretty much had a lot of bezel. So that is a very, very important thing to keep in mind. Now, the panel on this thing, that 5.5-inch Super AMOLED panel, was a very good display. Not only was it a pretty decent panel that curved to the edges, but it also was 1440p. How many panels out from 2016 had a 1440p display? I mean, there's not a lot of them, and the fact that this phone had that capability is something that is really, really cool, and I think it's probably this phone's biggest asset when it comes down to it. Now, on top of that, you had that home button on the front. Whether you like it or not, it was there. I think a lot of people probably don't like it anymore, but at that time, it was still something that was cool because it had that fingerprint sensor right on that home button, so that was something that was cool. You had the capacitive buttons right next to it, and the front of this thing I still think looks pretty good, but again, some people may think differently. Now, on the bottom, you had a micro USB port as well as a headphone jack, and on the back you had a glass back on this phone that supports wireless charging, which is great, and a single camera setup. Now, this camera is actually a 12 megapixel sensor, and this thing could actually shoot 4K videos at 30 frames per second. Now, in 2016, I don't think it was like a crazy feat that they did there, but it was still pretty impressive that they kept that really good sensor on it, and for the most part, it's not a bad camera. Like I've stated before on several different videos, one of the biggest problems that I think that a lot of these older iPhones or even older Androids are plagued with are the lack of multiple camera sensors. When you don't have that telephoto lens, you don't have that ultra-wide sensor, that can take a pretty big toll on the futurability of that device. That's why I think devices like the iPhone 7 Plus that came out in 2016, the same year as this, kind of hold up better in the camera department because it has multiple camera sensors. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's a better camera. I think the S7 Edge actually has a very good camera sensor on it, and I don't really think there's a lot to hate on it. Like I stated, it takes pretty decent photos, it still takes pretty decent videos, and I think for a day-to-day operation, I think a majority of people are probably going to be okay with it. It's still, I would not probably use this as an everyday camera, but still having that ability of shooting 4K at 30 is pretty relevant to this day and age, and I don't think anybody's even going above 1080p at 60 if I'm being completely honest. You have a 5 megapixel front-facing camera, and it's pretty bad, I'm not gonna lie. It's definitely not my favorite camera out there, but in the camera department as a whole for this device, I think it's actually a pretty decent camera. I don't think it's great, and I obviously, if like a camera was produced like this in 2020, I don't think anybody would like it, and they probably, hate that specific camera manufacturer. But I think for a lot of people out there, a phone like this is probably okay in terms of the camera department when you consider that it's like a 4-year-old phone at this point. So in terms of the camera for the S7 Edge, that really pretty much covers it up. Now, hitting on the software, this thing is not getting any more software updates. I'm sure we all know this thing was released with Android 6.0. We did eventually get Android 8.0, and in this day and age, like I said before, I mean, software is everything, and that's like why I said in the beginning of this video, the fact that this thing, if this thing got Android 11 or Android 10, even if it got One UI, I feel like it could have been pretty relevant still, just because of that One UI update. There were a lot of features and a lot of changes that happened. This was technically the last major flagship that came out with TouchWiz, and whether you like it or not, I think a majority of people don't like it, but still, it would have been really nice if it got One UI. Now, like I said, I think a lot of people think, with the custom ROM situation, you really actually need a Exynos version of the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge or any Galaxy series for the most part in order to custom ROM. And I think this series was the cutoff because I was able to custom ROM my Galaxy S6, and unfortunately I was not able to do my S7, S8, or S10. I think I tried to, I don't remember. So pretty much you're pretty limited when it comes down to the custom ROMs of this phone, but I still think, like I said before, in terms of the software standpoint, had this phone gotten one more version of software, it would have really showcased what this phone was capable of. I think Android 8 was like an okay version to end off, but definitely when it comes down to it, Android 9 would have been a lot better. But regardless, you can always throw a custom launcher on it. I think it just stopped getting security updates or something. I feel like I heard that somewhere, but for sure when it comes down to it, I'll probably give this one like a middle of the road when it comes down to software. In terms of the performance though, this thing did come out with a Qualcomm Snapdragon 820 chipset. If you're lucky enough to get the Exynos one, it was the Exynos 8890 chipset, a quad-core CPU, an Adreno 530 GPU, and 4 gigabytes of RAM on all the models that this phone was supported with. And that's actually kind of a lot of RAM if I'm being honest for a device like this. To give you some perspective, the Google Pixel 4 had 4 gigs of RAM, the Google Pixel 3 had 4 gigs of RAM, and obviously I think those phones are probably better than this one. It's still pretty impressive that this phone had that much RAM at this time. Now, performance-wise, I think this is probably the best way to put it. For a 4-year-old phone, it performs as expected. The smoothness factor of it is definitely not up there. I don't think this phone is as smooth as I was, hoping it to be. I feel like I've been saying it for a while too. Maybe I said the exact opposite earlier this year, but the more I use it and the more I see these newer phones, especially even like the Pixel 4a, and how smooth of a device that is for the most part for that price tag, it makes me kind of hesitant a little bit about these older iPhones now, mostly because the biggest downside of these phones was the smoothness factor. And I feel like that's still the biggest problem with a lot of these Android devices. When you look at it, even the Galaxy S20 or the OnePlus whatever, I'm seeing a lot of differences when it comes down to the smoothness. So when you go through the UI and swipe through apps and go to the home screen, I'm seeing some glitchiness, or even when you open an app, there's some glitchiness that goes on, which iOS is a king at. It is so good at being smooth, and that's definitely one of my favorite features. When it comes down to it, for sure, the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge is, not going to be the best performing phone, and there's a lot of glitchiness going on when you're going through the UI and everything. Now, if you put a custom launcher on it, it may change it just a little bit, but I still think for a majority of people out there, getting something like a Pixel 2 or a Pixel, even the original Pixel, it'll probably get you a better experience overall than this phone, and you can even custom ROM and kind of go from there. But I think the performance of the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge in the later part of 2020 is definitely not that great, and if you can spend a little bit more money, getting something like a Google Pixel or Pixel 2 or whatever will probably end up getting you a better performance overall. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it up. Now, ending it off with the battery life, this thing has a 3600 mAh battery, which is actually a pretty decently sized battery for this device, and I think it's, like I said before, one of its biggest assets. Now, it does have wireless charging, which is really cool, and the only downside of this specific battery is that it really wasn't the best, I think, early this year, but when it came out, a lot of people were hyping it up. A lot of people said this battery life was great. I don't think I ever bought this phone when it came out. I bought the S7, but I still think this phone in terms of the battery is pretty good for the legacy that it had. If you're going to replace it and put a full milliamp-hour battery on this, then I think it'd be great. I think mine's degraded to like 70 something percent, which is not good at all. Probably even less than that. But I think for a lot of people out there, if you're using this phone and you made it work so far, you're probably using a charger or you're probably charging it all the time. So in terms of the battery life, that pretty much covers it up. Now, to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you go and buy a Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge in the later part of 2020? And what I can tell you is, I would not recommend anybody buying a Galaxy S7 Edge in the later part of 2020 if I'm being completely honest. This phone is pretty much outdated for the most part. The hardware is surprisingly decent. You're getting that IP certification, the microSD card slot, great screen, headphone jack if you're into it, and it just feels like a very, very premium phone still, and that's probably the one thing that people maybe, still sticking on this phone with. It still feels like a very premium $1,000 phone. If it wasn't for that home button on the front, I think a lot of people would still be talking about this phone, but the fact of the matter is, it just isn't that great of a performing phone. The stability isn't there, the software updates aren't there, and even the camera's not even that great if I'm being honest right now. It was at that point, but in this day and age, it's better to have a better camera sensor, and I feel like me personally, if I had to go and use this phone and if I had to complain about something, it'd be two things. the stability of the performance, and probably just, the stability of the software. I feel like when I use this phone and whenever I do anything on it, I've been using this phone for a couple years now, and I can tell you, like, it's a decent phone, but I personally would not recommend it to anybody. The lowest I would go, like I said before, right now on the Samsung devices would probably honestly be like a Galaxy S9 if you're trying to stick with Samsung, but Samsung makes a lot of cheaper devices too, like something like a Galaxy A20 from last year. I would rather have that over this phone for thousands of reasons, but even something like a Google Pixel 2, that thing is still supported. It may not be the best looking phone, but it kind of shares a lot what this device has, and the software support is still there. It's a smoother experience in my opinion, and like I said, it's still supported, so if there's an issue with it, you can go and get it fixed. With the Galaxy S7 Edge, we really don't have that, which is super unfortunate. So you kind of have to make the decision there. Like I said before, in my opinion, I would not recommend picking up a Galaxy S7 Edge in 2020, but if you're somebody who's actually made it work this far and you've been using the S7 Edge and you enjoy it or whatever, let me know in the comment section below. I would love to hear your opinion on it, but that really pretty much covers it up for the most part. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.